Today's episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast is sponsored by Web Healer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. Web Healer are offering Counselling Tutor Podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, Web Healers specialize in websites for counselors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the Web Healer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, Web Healer are a trusted resource amongst counselors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counsellingtutor.com/website. That's counsellingtutor.com/website.
Hello and welcome to episode 369 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. I'm Rory and my guest today is a Manchester-based BACP accredited counsellor, Nadine Pittam, who draws on person-centred therapy, aspects of transactional analysis and internal family systems model in her clinical practice, bringing a rich and integrative approach to her work with clients. She is also an accredited member of COURST, the UK's leading professional body for sex and relationship therapy, and holds a Level 5 certificate in psychosexual therapy. Today, Nadine joins us to explore a powerful and insightful lecture that she's recorded for the Counsellor CPD Library titled Working with Limerent, Codependent or Obsessively Romantic Clients. Together, we'll be unpacking what limerence really is, how it shows up in therapy, and how counsellors can work ethically, safely and effectively with these deep relationship patterns. So with that said, let's roll the intro.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for counsellors, psychotherapists, and counselling students. Here are your hosts, Rory Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and welcome to episode 369 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast with Rory Oakes and Ken Kelly. Rory and I today walking you through 3 stops, starting at that ethical, sustainable practice, where today we're going to be speaking about working with shame in the therapy room. We then move on to practice matters. Rory has already beautifully introduced Nadine Pittam, who is talking today about her lecture on limerence. Very interesting indeed. You want to make sure you don't miss that. And then we go into student services, where today for students we're speaking about what you do when you feel out of your depth as a student counsellor. And looking back, Rory, I can certainly relate to feeling like that a few times. But let's start off with that ethical, sustainable practice where we're looking at shame in the therapy room. And I have to say, Rory, I think this is a really good topic because, boy, does shame show up.
Yeah, it does. And I think in our society, shame is more prevalent than perhaps we like to think. You know, when people say something and they say, well, you know, do you want to come and, I don't know, do you want to come play 10-pin bowling with me? And you say, no, I have to do something else. They say, oh, that's a real shame. You know, even the word is woven in to the vocabulary, certainly the English vocabulary. And it's a projection term, isn't it? When someone says that's a shame, what they're really saying is you're not doing what I want. Or it could be
Yeah.
Interpreted like that. And I think a lot of clients present with shame, and it usually remains hidden in the shadows of the psyche. And it's only through the arc of therapy that people may want to gently try to bring that shame into the therapy room. They may talk about something they've done in the past where they feel ashamed of it, or others have told them that it's shameful. And it's a heavy weight to carry. And I think one of the difficulties with shame, it carries a fear of being judged. You know, the very fact that someone said shame to you, or it's, you've shamed the family, means that you wear this kind of badge. There's a famous book or play called The Scarlet Letter, where women had to have a scarlet letter kind of attached to their dress to show that they'd done something wrong. And I think that's how clients feel. They feel that they carry this burden, and it's a big risk to bring it into the therapy room and to talk about it. It's something I think that we need to. It's a shame, Ken, that we've not spoken about it before.
There's the word, and it's a word we commonly use, isn't it? Oh, what a shame. But when you dig a little bit deeper into this, it's very interesting kind of understanding shame. And I think a great place to start is looking into self and looking if you can identify any shame that you might carry as an individual. It gives us maybe an understanding of how hidden shame might be. So shame, as you quite rightly introduced, Rory, it hides itself. It is the darkest of secrets. Shame is even to admit to yourself, because when shame arises from a thought, or there's a triggering event, and I'm just talking in day-to-day life, the coping mechanism around that is usually to put it back into its box, lock the lid, throw the key away, and put the box into a dark place, or distract yourself, or those are kind of the ways that we might react. And I'm talking about our own shame, looking at it ourselves. And what shame tends to do is it identifies with the individual themselves. So it's unlike guilt. So guilt is, some years ago I did some things, I'm really not proud of them. I did those things wrong. I have regrets around doing those things, I guess. That's not shame. There may be guilt, but shame is very different. As opposed to saying, you know what, I did something wrong. Shame might show itself as there's something wrong with me at my core. So the individual identifies with a fault or something that is not right in themselves, as opposed to it being an action that they may have played out. And it's that reason that it's so hidden, I guess, because if there's something wrong with me, I better not show the world that, because the world's not going to accept it. And I know that for sure because I can't accept it myself. So it can be a very heavy heavy emotion, I guess, to talk about. It's got to be done really gently. And chances are, if you're dealing with shame in your therapy room, it's not going to be in your first session. You're going to have built up a relationship with this client, and then you might just see subtle clues. And we'll go on to what those might look like in a moment, which may open a door, because shame may show itself just as a little crack in the door that lets a tiny little bit of light into that dark and then quickly closes itself again. But as a therapist, if you are sensitive to that and know what to look for, there is an opportunity to welcome a little bit more light into the session, Rory.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we wouldn't be doing this topic justice if we didn't link it to neurodiversity or neurodivergence. Certainly as someone who has autistic traits, I went through life for a long time thinking I am something wrong, because I was told that, why aren't you trying harder with your reading and writing? Well, reading was okay. Why aren't you trying hard with your writing? You could read properly, but why can't you write? Or why can't you run around the track as fast as the other lads? And, why are you such an awkward person? And I'm sure that, I know you're autistic, Ken, that this is something that's probably happened. I know it's happened in your world. And also I think that it happens in people who are autistic's world more than we like to think, because there's this idea of being that you're something wrong. If you're in a group of people who seem very different to you, you get the idea that you are something wrong. And you're right, it does focus on identity. And what could happen is that people will withdraw or hide. They won't go to things or talk about things because they feel there's something wrong. With guilt, it's more like I did something wrong, and maybe if I do something different, I can fix it. But I do think that it is shame and not autism. I mean, certainly from my perspective, and I'm open to anybody telling me anything different. Is linked, and I think that how that presents in all clients is that people apologise or minimise feelings. They may avoid eye contact or speak quietly. Social isolation or withdrawal and connection, and just feeling very unsafe when discussing emotions. In fact, sometimes even becoming dismissive or angry. So it's something that, although people may appear confident on the surface, deep shame can be really a cyclic thing of self-blame that's quite difficult to shift. It really is quite difficult to shift, Ken.
Yeah, it is, very much so. And yes, there is definitely that link that I can recognize too in neurodivergence. And I think that is worth noting and understanding. And for myself and in my own journey, it was when I got my diagnosis and I started understanding who I am. I could look back and look at the shame that I'd carried secretly, thinking, everybody gets this except me, and there's something wrong with me. There's something fundamentally wrong with me, and I recognize, at the time when I grew up, maybe I lived in a very different world back then, and the information that is available now on neurodivergence was not as easily accessible. And I'm going to use a word here. I think that I was shamed as I was growing up. And we've spoken again about trauma within neurodivergence as well. But anyway, that's a massive topic and a deep dive topic. So sticking now with where we are, I think let's just touch on the cycle of shame. How does it look, and how does that play out? So let's start with the trigger occurs, and it can be so many different things. It depends on the person, but it might be a criticism, it might be a rejection, it could be a conflict in a certain situation, it could be doing a project or something and failing at that, or it can just be one of those memories that jumps out of the wardrobe at 3:00 in the morning and goes, ha ha, almost seems like it comes out of nowhere, this painful memory. And then it's almost like that shame is instantly activated. You feel it. It's in your body. And you start thinking of those really negative words. And when I say youth, I'm speaking about myself now, thinking of those really negative words. I'm not worthy. I'm weak. I'm unlovable. There's something wrong with me. And then usually there'll be some kind of a coping strategy, as we mentioned a little bit earlier. I said putting it in a box and locking it and putting it away, and that is complete, like trying to distract way. But there's other ways. There's withdrawal, there's anger, using control of the situation. You know what? I'm going to stand up and I'm going to be all confident in this situation. I'm going to take control of this situation. It's a way of masking and hiding behind that. Or an emotional numbing. And I can certainly recognize that within my own experience of shame, of an emotional numbing of, it's almost like the emotion shuts down because it has to, because it is the level of pain that I personally feel when shame arises in me. It's a deep, sickening, powerful feeling. And, I've developed ways of not feeling those emotions, and it's kind of shutting all emotions down. And from that, within this cycle, there's a temporary relief. It's okay, that's gone now. It's back in the box, and we've locked the box, and it's back in the room there. Whew, I'm all right now. Everything's fine. But what really we're doing is we're reinforcing the shame. We're saying, yes, you deserve to be in that box, and you need to be locked up, and you need to be in that dark room. And when that shame is reinforced, it just keeps it deeply rooted, and it can actually become more deeply rooted over time. And that's one of the interesting things about shame, is it doesn't dissipate with time. many other feelings, and you can take really difficult feelings to face. And I'm going to take grief as an example here. And I know there's different forms of grief, and there's conflict, and there's complex grief, and there's kinds of grief that don't dissipate. But generally, grief over time will lessen and it will dissipate slightly, and you're more able to kind of go back to the events and look at them from a different vantage point. But shame seems to reinforce itself over time. It almost becomes more unacceptable as the time goes by when you look at it, because it's all, I think about it as that acceptance of self, Rory, but if we look at that incongruence of there's a part of me that I can't accept, when we develop and go through life and we look back at that, maybe we've grown a bit, maybe we've done counselling training and personal development, and then when we look back at that part, it's almost more unacceptable. How could I ever have been like that? And it's an interesting cycle because it plays out again and again and again and again, unless the shame is worked with. And I guess that's what we're going on to now, Rory. Can you introduce us to working with shames? What some practical interventions of what we can do as therapists?
Yeah, and I think I'm going to use the metaphor of, walking through a fine china shop with all that lovely, beautiful china on these very wobbly tables, making sure that as you walk through, you don't knock it off. And that's exactly what we do as therapists, isn't it? We walk into a client's, perceptual reality through their story. And we have to be very, very careful, and we have to be gentle, and we have to go quietly amongst their identity, and not to force our view. And if we think that there could be shame, we sometimes have a kind of perception of this. It might be wondering, just gently saying to the client, I am wondering if there is any shame present here. Or saying, I noticed you looked away when you said that. I wonder, what's happened to you in that moment. Very gently, just broaching the subject. And sometimes if you do it gently, and just name it, say in situations like you've mentioned, some people may feel that they're embarrassed or unworthy or feel shame in that situation. And I think if you name it with sensitivity, it reduces the intensity and it helps the client feel less alone. I think that's really, really, really important, Ken.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting. I love how you've kind of set that out. Shame will it'll raise its head. It'll try and show itself. And it's an opportunity for us to exercise our empathy and our unconditional positive regard here. Because what shame tries to do is it shows itself as not even being acceptable to self. So you'll know if you look to your own shame when that rises up, what does that look like? It looks like, I don't even want to look at this myself. It's not even acceptable to me. So therefore, how can it be acceptable to another human being? This is why it's so hidden. So if it does show itself in a client in your therapy room, and you are able to name it or see it or point to it kindly and holding that person, you're almost modeling the opposite of what a person may feel that people might do if they see the shame. If people see the shame, they're not going to want to know me. If they know this part of me, they're not going to even want to speak to me or spend any time with me. But just gently, as you said, and warmly, Rory, welcoming shame into the relationship. And it can be quite a new experience for a client to take out this shame and have another human being even be close to them while this is being looked at. It can be the first time that this has ever happened for them, and that can be incredibly powerful. And if you do see a little bit of a hint of it, you said it beautifully, Rory, you don't want to be the bull in the china shop because that breaks all the stuff. It's very, very gentle. And there's ways of gently bringing that in without jumping into the shame. I wonder what that is. Let's explore that. Whoa. As the client, I might just be not ready for that now. Thank you very much. So this gentleness is really important. And a great way of keying into that gentleness is to go, I wonder what that feels like in your body. Show me, touch the part of your body where you feel that the most. So what we're doing then is we're looking at the emotion and where it is manifesting in the body rather than diving straight in. So we're slowly welcoming that shame into the environment where the client may then say, you know what, it sits just right here, the top of my chest and the bottom of my stomach, and it's like this horrible black knot. It's like a weight on my chest. And suddenly we're in the conversation, which is where it all starts. To be able to deal with that shame, for it to dissipate, it needs to be shown the light and to be worked with, Rory.
Oh, I like that, Ken. I like that. Shown the light and be worked with. Because, of course, shame is the emotion that dare not speak its name. So by bringing it into the light, you know, you and the client can look at it and maybe explore the origins of it. And I think that shame often develops where a person is criticised or humiliated or rejected or their emotions are invalidated. And in my experience and that of my clients, it usually starts with parents, teachers, authority figures, or even friends or peers. And it can look like bullying or exclusion. It can look like that, and there's usually a great element of that. Coercion or being abused, either physically or emotionally or mentally, and being treated differently because of your culture, who you are, your identity, your neurodivergence, if you're disabled, or a family background. And I'm sure there's going to be lots of people listening to this conversation, Ken, who are vigorously nodding their heads as I go through
I'm
this
nodding
list.
mine as you're saying all this stuff. I'm really
my head's
nodding
nearly
my head.
My head's nearly nodded off my shoulder, to be honest. I'm doing that much nodding. And also conditional approval. Love was linked to performance or behaviour, or approval was linked to that. And I think, as a therapist, that we don't often, we're not encouraged to ask questions. But I think sometimes, just sometimes, it's very useful to just maybe broach a question saying, when did you first feel remembering that way? Because I think getting to the root of things is really important, because sometimes the perception of shame can be other people. So when people shame you, it actually may be the other person's stuff, not yours. Which then moves on to, who taught you that you were not good enough, and what did you need at the time you didn't receive? And I think all those questions are slightly Socratic, to be honest. But I think sometimes I've definitely used those as a therapist. And the last one, what did you need at the time you did not receive, really elicits the response that people need for healing. I wanted to be seen. I wanted to be seen as who I am, and not as what other people wanted, or to understand my struggles, or to just be more curious about who I am. And, isn't that therapy in a nutshell? Isn't that what we do? And I guess sorry, Ken, I think by exploring the origins of shame, client, I think by exploring the origins of shame, it can help clients see it as more of a learned experience than something inherent. Yep. Maybe that, what was then isn't now. And I always say, no matter if you're person-centered or psychoanalytical or psychodynamic or cognitive behavioral or whatever modality you use, most of the time in therapy, we work with the presenting past. And I think, Ken, separating identity from experience is important here, isn't it?
Definitely. And it's interesting. You spoke about the questioning, and dependent on your modality, you might use questioning differently. But these questions are important. They play a really important part, and they're incredibly powerful. So I spoke just a little bit earlier, we were discussing how shame wants to hide away, and you may just get that little glimpse through the door. And then you don't want to be running in and grabbing that. You want to be gently coaxing that out. And one of those questions might be, where in your body do you feel this? Now the person is talking about the feeling that they're feeling, not an action or a thing that played out. They're just talking about that feeling. And then that first question that you mentioned, Rory, is really powerful in this situation. When do you first remember feeling that way? And that gives the person the opportunity to go back to, was I bullied? Was I coerced? Was I treated differently? Was I overlooked in the family? Was I all of that kind of stuff? It kind of again just invites in a little bit more and a little bit more of the shame. We're treading so gently here. And then that second question again, so powerful. Listen to this question. It's so powerful. Who taught you that you are not good enough? And if you look at that question, it is so incredibly powerful because it takes it away from them as the client and it puts it on someone else. Because it's an introjection. If you think about it, the shame. So if somebody bullied them or something like that, they'll go, well, it was that person. And all of a sudden, there's someone else involved here. It's not me, and I'm not worthy, and I'm not lovable. All of a sudden, there's a glimpse of another person. So it shows that there is a collaborator in this shame, that it's bigger, and there's somewhere to go within that. And then that third question, so powerful again. What was it that you needed at that time that you didn't receive? And it allows or invites that client to look back on that of what was the deficit, what could have been there, what might have worked, what might have nurtured that, because that's the beginning of the healing. And if you notice, what we haven't done is go diving into the shame and finding out what the story is. It's not important. We're working with the emotion, not the narrative. And those questions are incredibly powerful. They're in the handout as well. So we'll give you the link to the handout in a bit. So I think what we're looking for really is we're looking for avoidance. We're looking for protective strategies that we may see in our clients. We're looking for that door crack just opening slightly so that we can warmly, empathically, non-judgmentally work with what is shown slowly and gently, Rory.
Absolutely. And I think that, one of the big pieces of work within therapy is separating identity from experience. Our experiences form our identity. And I think sometimes in therapy, a therapist just kind of reflecting something along the lines of you went through something painful, but it doesn't mean you're flawed or bad, kind of separates the experience from the identity. Or you could say something happened to you, but this does not define who you are. Your feelings make sense given what you've lived through. And sometimes just that observation, I think that sometimes therapists are observers of what the client is experiencing, can be very helpful. I know that when I've said to clients in the past, what happened to you doesn't define who you are, is incredibly freeing, because just because somebody said something doesn't mean what they say is correct. It's their opinion. And although could be very, very hurtful, especially for children, it doesn't define who you are or who you become. And I think that once a therapist has that sensibility, it starts to help the client separate the identity from the experience. I think that's where the vitamin is injected. That's where the healing can start, the process of healing can start, Ken.
Yeah, very much so. And as we always like to do as we near the end of this topic, it's around what can you do? What is implementable here? And if you think about your processing after a client leaves, how you might process information, we can ask ourselves questions that we may put into our journals and around what signs of shame did I notice with a client? How did that shame show itself? Was it words? Was it a posture? Was it avoidance? Did a strong emotion just show itself? What did I do within that moment to help that client feel safe? And that's the important thing, not to bring out the shame, to help them feel safe. Did I intentionally reinforce shame in any way? Because shame does get reinforced from time to time. We can look at ourselves and reflectively ask that question. What might it have looked like? And then how did I feel working with that person and their shame? Because, of course, all of this will link into what am I going to go and take into supervision around this now?
Yes.
What might I need from my supervisor on this? Any final thoughts as we close out this topic, Rory, before we go and point to the handout?
Well, I think that shame is something that we sometimes, our radar, if you like, our therapeutic radar needs to attune to. So we need to tune it into that frequency so we can pick it up. And I think that voicing it in supervision is really important. So if you're working with clients and after you've heard this, you think that could be shame, bring it to supervision, because what happens in supervision is you can expand your kind of thinking on where the client is. And I think once you've some people probably have tuned their therapeutic radar to shame, but I think once it's firmly in the radar console, to use a kind of technical term, I think you'll pick it up more often than you might have done before you knew about it. There are so many people who carry shame. It's very, very powerful. In fact, I would think the majority of people who I've seen through my life, not just as clients but as humans, do carry a lot of shame. And I think if we can put that heavy bag of shame down, I think it's in service of the clients and people's mental health, to be honest.
Wow, important topic. Key takeaways: shame often hides itself, as we've discussed. Shame is identity-based. We might hear words like "I am bad" rather than "I did something wrong." Many clients may need time, careful pacing to explore that shame without becoming overwhelmed. Shame reduces when it's met with empathy, acceptance, and emotional safety, and that is our role within the relationship. And supporting clients to separate their self-worth, "I am bad," from the painful experience and what happened is central to that shame work. And Rory's created a super duper handout, and you can get that by going to counsellingtutor.com, click on the podcast tab, and find your way to episode 369. Right there, you'll find the download on working with shame in counselling, and that is today's ethical, sustainable practice. So, Rory, I guess as we kind of move out of ethical, sustainable practice, we're going into our practice matters. You beautifully introduced Nadine at the top of our podcast today, but give us a little bit of taste of what we can expect now.
Yes, well, I caught up with Nadine Pittam, who is a psychotherapist, and I think a bit of a leader in terms of understanding certainly one part of the human condition, which is called limerence, this kind of longing to be loved and hanging on to a past relationship, becoming stuck. It's an area that I knew very little about before Nadine enlightened me. I caught up with her, and this is what she had to say. The word limerence came to my attention only today when today's guest offered to give a lecture on the subject. After undertaking some cursory research, I discovered that limerence can be defined as a state of deep infatuation or romantic desire for someone. This has found its way into popular culture, as the lyrics of the Oasis song "Slide Away" perfectly capture. Noel Gallagher wrote this song about the ending of his relationship, and it starts off by saying, "Slide away, I give it all you've got. My today fell in from the top. I dream of you and all the things you say. I wonder where you are now." So it's my great pleasure to welcome Nadine Pittam, who's done a fabulous lecture for the Counsellor CPD Library called Working with Limerence, Codependent or Obsessively Romantic Clients. So Nadine, thank you so much for joining us again.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's great to be here. Thanks.
And, I guess the question is, what is limerence and why isn't it love?
Okay, so there's our 20 minutes right there. You use the phrase deep infatuation, and I would like to start with that, with a little expansion on the word deep, because I wouldn't want any therapist to come away from this conversation assuming that this is just a little crush. People have these feelings and they feel like life and death. I have zero evidence for this, but I believe that people are in prison. I believe people kill themselves and each other for the enormity and the strength of these feelings. They are involuntary. The person has zero control. I say zero, very minimal control over their intensity, over how often they come, what happens to them inside somebody's head. It's a state of almost permanent dysregulation, and as such is absolutely terrifying for the person who's suffering. Dorothy Tenov, who first kind of coined the term really in 1979 in her book Love and Limerence, she said it's compulsion for one person, this one person above all other things. And it is, like I say, it's unwilled. It leaves somebody utterly undernourished because they retreat from life. So the limerence sufferer will retreat from life and they will become utterly lost inside their own mind, because essentially the limerent thoughts, the limerent feelings they're a soothing, they're a balm. It's an addiction. So the person that they're limerent over might as well be a bottle of vodka or a hypodermic needle. The person is almost irrelevant, and we'll come to why they're relevant later, I hope, anyway.
Yeah, so,
you said why? Oh, sorry, I was going to say why is it not love? I felt like that's just the first.
Oh, right. Well, don't let me stop you. Carry on.
Why is it not love? I think maybe the best thing to say is that love is messy. Love is nourishing. Love requires two people. It's expansive and it makes people feel better, not worse. And limerence almost invariably, because it's an addictive process, reduces a person's life and they have zero control.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. It's almost like the kind of obsessed teenager who has pictures on their wall of their pop or football star, and will talk about their life as if that person was in it. What would, I don't know, Eric Cantona, the footballer, do, or what would name any pop singer? I'm completely not au fait with the pop charts now at my tender age, but that kind of almost obsessive. Well, we said it's not love, but obsessive need for them, and so I guess that leads me on to, at what point would someone come into therapy? Would they come into therapy because they need help with the longing, or they want to talk about longing? What's the path for the limerent client then? Why would they present?
Because it's destroying their lives. Some people will have a relationship. I have several people on my books at the moment and have been and gone who've had relationships that have faltered and broken down because of their obsessive feelings to somebody else. So sometimes people come in and they're in the throes of it and they're in the clutches of it, and that's harder to work with, because what we have to do first is basically not listen to them, because the person is going to come in and all they're going to want to do is talk about this limerent object, this person that they're obsessed with. And our task then is to not really allow that, to use it as to use this other person as clues, as breadcrumbs, as portals to the unmet needs of the client in front of us. Does that make sense?
It does.
But sometimes people come in after the relationship has broken down and they know they're sort of just emerging out of the cliff face of the desperation, and they can start to see that they've lost something. They've lost a part of themselves. They've lost maybe friends, partners.
Yeah.
And they might come in to sort of rebuild. But often people come in because it is an intolerable state. It's intolerable. It's horrific.
Gosh. Yeah, this yearning, this unmet need. So the word that came into my awareness is hunger. Feels almost like a hunger for a person. And can limerence be for someone they've had a relationship with, or for someone who's totally unavailable, like film star or a pop star or a social media influencer now, or is it usually someone they've been in a relationship with?
It's often somebody that they've either been in a relationship with or that they have a glancing encounter with. So maybe the barista at their local coffee shop, or a colleague at work that they encounter maybe daily, maybe not so daily. And it's interesting you called it hunger. It has been described as attachment hunger, that it actually comes from broken attachment needs. Howard Halpern wrote a quite dated book now, unfortunately, but there's a lot in it that's brilliant. Howard Halpern wrote How to Break Your Addiction to a Person, and he called it attachment hunger. And so it is a yearning for a person out there, this person out there. And so if it's a colleague, for example, which it often is, it's somebody I know just enough about to know that I like them, but they've got enough of a blank slate about them that I can then project all my needs, all my longings, all the parts of myself that I have disowned. I can project them all into that blank space of this person that I don't know. The more somebody gets to know somebody, the less limerent they're likely to be, because that person inevitably becomes real. And so they can't be godlike, they can't be divine, and they can't be this magical other who's going to solve all my problems, because yet again, they're just a human being who is full of flaws, full of disappointment, and full of mystery.
So that's really fascinating. They get a sense of who somebody is. It might be a brief encounter, as you say, with a barista at the coffee shop or someone at work. And then without fully knowing them, they create a complete romantic story with the limerence involved, and develop this kind of fantasy life. And those fantasies are the projection of unmet attachment needs. Would I be on the right track with that?
You're certainly on the right track with that, which is why the thing that they are fantasizing about, not the person, but the thing that they're projecting, is the focus of the therapeutic work. So it may be, for example, that the client in front of you is obsessed with this other person, and look at their stratospheric career, look at how clever they've been in their life. This person is obsessed with how successful this person has been. And what we're not interested in is whether or not this limerent object is successful or stratospherically successful, whatever. What we're interested in is, how does the client in front of us, how have they managed to feel that somebody else's success is the only way that they can touch success? So how have they disowned their own agency in their own life? Does that make sense?
Yeah, they're living vicariously.
Of course. By being near, in the orbit of someone who they've fantasized about. Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. So the work, I guess, from what you're saying, lies in looking at the attachment areas or where someone might be attached. So this sounds very much like working with the presenting past. Absolutely. And of course, we do that subconsciously. We do that without the client necessarily knowing that we're doing all of that, isn't it? That's what the knowledge that we bring quietly to the encounter, and what we're trying to do. And it's a delicate balance, isn't it? Because we need to validate the emotion that they're feeling, which is often absolute terror. We need to validate that emotion, but not trust the narrative that they give us, which is, and this person will soothe it. Because it is an outsourcing of their care to this other person. So what we're trying to do is not listen to how they think this other person is going to solve it, but instead to empower the person themselves to realize, embrace, manifest those things in their own life that they think this other person has possessed.
Yes, take ownership. And if we had long enough, I suppose we could talk about ego development and confluence and, the breaking away that children do. Margaret Warner, I think it was, who talked about this. But it is absolutely fascinating. So the work is to not listen too much to the narrative. And I think a lot of therapists may go, well, not listening to the client, this is heresy. But I'm kind of reminded of something Rogers said. Rogers talked about his experience, and he said, my experience is infallible, therefore it needs to be checked in new and primary ways. And I guess that's what the role of the therapist is here, isn't it?
Yeah, and you just reminded me of something else that I thought about that has simply left me straight away. Oh yeah, the congruence that when we are the therapist in the room, how do we know whether the narrative is something that we can trust or whether we should be focusing more on the emotion? This seems really important to me that we, to coin Roger's term, we tap into our congruence, because if our client is in a trance-like state, we start to feel whatever we feel when somebody is avoiding something. So for me, I often feel a kind of somnolence, a sort of sleepy sadness, and maybe sometimes tinged with frustration, but certainly a sleepiness comes over me when the person sitting in front of me is trying to avoid something. And so that tells me that the narrative that they're spinning, they're lost. They're not with me. They're not in psychological contact with me at that moment. And so the congruence that I'm feeling is the thing then that I need to check the other person, bring them online with me first.
Yes.
I feel like you've disappeared. Where have you gone? And then when we pull them back to reality, then we can do the work. But while they're fawning in that state, then we're not doing much use at all. Of course, there is another problem, isn't there, which is that we could be the limerent object, because we are perfect as therapists, because they know just enough about us, and we are often compassionate and perfect blank space for the clients to impose upon us whatever they need.
Yes, it's always, funnily enough, I was talking to a colleague about this, and there's always an awareness that therapists need, because when you are the therapist, you are by a de facto position doing some repatriative reparenting style. I mean, Patricia Clarkson talks about this in a 5 relationship model. And what you're doing is you're setting the kind of healthy parental style that a parent would. And what I'm talking about here is boundaries, consistency, being present, attention. And, it can be quite a potent thing to have, or a potent feeling to have somebody doing that for you when you may never have had that in your life. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how would a therapist know, first of all, that they are now becoming the limerence object?
Well, crikey, I imagine that's as unique as the person in front of us. It can be that we start to think about the client in front of us differently. So maybe we start to think about, and it's the sexual countertransference, the erotic countertransference. Sometimes we might start thinking about them in a sexual context in a way that we never have before. We might start feeling like our ego is bolstered, like we really look forward to seeing that client because we feel like we can't do anything wrong. There could be anything that's at play, and as soon as we're getting any sort of twinges like that, we need to go to supervision and explore it. But generally, we will feel something shift. There will be a shift, and it's how attuned to that shift we are. So, like I say, could be some kind of erotic countertransference, could be a shift in our own ego state that we are starting to feel adored in some way.
Yes. It's absolutely fascinating, and if you as a therapist got the sense that this transference was being played out by the client to you, and you were slowly becoming the limerent person, how would you? What kind of intervention would you use to bring everything back to the here and now?
Gently. I would use gentle intervention.
Of course.
Slowly, because of course they might not be aware that it's happening, because this will be a pattern that they have that they might not even know is a slippery slope to something.
Yes.
And so the sooner we can catch it, then the sooner we can say things like, has something changed? I'm feeling like something's different between us. We can start with something really vague like that, couldn't we? Or we could start with, I feel like sometimes I say things and it doesn't really land, and yet you still tell me that I've understood, or you still say yes to something that I've said. I just wonder, have I really understood you? Are there moments where I'm not getting you, but you're trying to somehow flatter me or make me feel good? Or what's going on in our relationship right now? I wonder if there's something that we need to talk about, something that might feel a little bit awkward. I just want you to know that that's okay. We can talk about that. We can talk about it in a really open way, and I won't take anything personal from it. I don't know whether any of those things feel helpful, because I do think it will depend entirely on the person in front of you, how quickly you've noticed, what your relationship with your supervisor is, when your next session with your supervisor is. But certainly, if you try and pretend it's not there, then you are on a slippery slope with them.
Yes, absolutely.
So it's got to be in your awareness, absolutely front and centre in your awareness.
And I'm sure there's going to be people listening to this, our wonderful listener, who might be thinking, oh gosh, that's kind of happening to me. Because I think it does happen perhaps more than we're aware in the therapy room, because of this very repetitive style that we have, and the stability that sometimes some clients just never experienced in their life. It's very, very new to have a stable person, a good enough other, as our mother, as Winnicott rightly observed, that stability.
Which is why it's so important that we keep those boundaries then. So again, the client will start to push boundaries. They will start to demand more of us, ask more of us. They might start talking about the rapport that you share, or don't we get on really well? Or, there'll be just some things where they're trying to pull you outside of the boundaries of the transactional relationship that is therapeutic.
Yes. Things like, if you weren't my therapist, we could go out for a coffee together. That type of thing. I've certainly experienced that. And I guess, of course, the work here is supporting long-term healing, not just relief of symptoms. So,
of course,
would you say this is, generally speaking, a longer-term engagement?
The quickest I've seen somebody come through from being in the throes of it to being on the other side of it is 10 months. And that person's through everything at the work, and they were brave and unrelenting. 10 months it's been breakneck speed. So definitely we're looking at over a year, I should think.
Yeah, because I think that's important to be straight with the clients. If a client comes and talks about what's going on for them, I don't know how other people contract, but I used to contract and say, this isn't going to be 3 or 4 weeks. This may be quite long term. And, because obviously if someone's paying for therapy, I think it's only fair that, they know the kind of commitment they're getting into. And, I don't think there's anything worse than unfinished business where someone starts a path and then just has to stop. Because that can compound the issue, I think.
And you're talking there about financial constraints and time constraints, but you've also got the other issue of, as with any addiction, when we take away the balm, then what have you got left is the pain that the balm was soothing.
Yes.
And so the emotional work that needs to be undertaken, the confronting of their own truths, of all the times they've been misattuned to by their family of origin, all the times they've experienced neglect, but sometimes abuse too, of course. What we're doing is we're basically trying to have the client make contact with all those truths, which is one huge bucket of pain, isn't it? But then we're also trying to encourage them to develop a self-compassion about their behaviour, which might not always be impeccable. In the face of these feelings, people do not behave impeccably. No. And so then they have to develop a self-compassion where they can look at how they have arrived at this destination and be gentle with themselves. I think the emotional toll, not just the financial and the time toll, but the emotional toll, we have to be frank.
Yeah, I think that people have to be kind, thoughtful, forgiving of themselves, because in my experience, people have presented with this. Now I've got a name for it. Thank you. They've given themselves a really hard time. They felt foolish or silly. Why have I spent my time, with a poster of a a pop singer on the wall, or fantasizing about the person who I meet, I don't know, in the supermarket.
Why have I left my marriage of 20 years?
Yes.
For this person that I've known for 6 weeks?
Yeah.
Lives are destroyed. It is horrific.
Yeah. And of course, this is sometimes unrequited, isn't it? The limerent object may have absolutely no interest in the person of the desire may have no interest in the person who's desiring them.
It's interesting you say that, because the Crappy Childhood Fairy, I don't know whether you know her, she runs a podcast, The Crappy Childhood Fairy. She calls it eroticized abandonment.
How interesting.
Limerence is eroticized abandonment, which is such a pithy phrase to sum up what's happening. And so she believes that there needs to be an element of rejection in order for the limerence to even be there. So if somebody was attuned and present and real, this is the thing, isn't it? Not just serving, yes, absolutely serving the other, but if somebody is genuinely attuned and holding on to themselves, limerence is not possible in that state. Which is why if people do end up in a relationship with the person they've been limerent for, then the limerence dissolves after 6 to 9 months when all those chemicals calm down. And then they're left with a relationship and they have to know whether, can that relationship work? Sometimes it can.
Yes. The more I'm thinking about this, the more I'm thinking that this is something that up until you brought this, and I thank you for it, it's never something that's been in my awareness, and I've heard a lot over my years of practice. Seems to me, once I heard the phrase and deep dived into the research, it's something that I've historically seen present in my therapy room, in those I've supervised, and has been discussed in training when I was a trainer. Yet it wasn't really compounded or kind of given a name. So I think this lecture really is an important lecture to listen to. Working with limerence, codependent or obsessively romantic clients by Nadine Pittam is available in the CPD library now. And it just remains for me to say, Nadine Pittam, thank you so much for joining us.
Practice Matters is proudly sponsored by the Counsellor CPD Library. To access top quality, relevant continuing professional development for your practice that you can do at a time that suits you, and all for less than the price of a cup of coffee, visit counsellingtutor.com. Massive thank you to Nadine Pittam. Thank you to you, Rory, again for holding those all-important discussions. And that was Practice Matters. Moving right into student services. And today in student services, we're speaking about the topic of when you feel out of your depth as a student in counselling. Now, this happens all the time. We hear about it on the Facebook group when we talk together. Rory, my goodness me, am I worthy? I feel out of my depth here. Am I the right person for this client? All of those kind of questions come up. So it's very, very common. You may have felt it or you may feel it as you go into your placement. Tell us more about it, Rory.
Yes, and you're absolutely right, Ken. This came up in our Facebook group. And if you want to pop into our Facebook group and have a look round, just go to Facebook, type in Counselling Tutor, and there you are in. And you are absolutely right, Ken, that it's not unusual for those who are students to feel out of their depth. And usually what happens in my experience is that students do maybe the first year of their diploma or their degree. They get a real underpinning of the theory, the ethics, the law, all the things they need to be as a therapist. They do their skills practice, and then they go into the therapy room, meet the client, and at some point, I think the penny drops that this isn't the same as skills practice. This isn't like doing skills practice with a peer. Clients can go off the script. Clients can, not end on time. Clients can bring material, which, quite frankly, can be incredibly, incredibly hard to listen to. As a therapist, I've heard stories that they don't quite give me nightmares, but I wouldn't want to dwell too much on them. If they do come up as I'm kind of thinking around the house, I tend to bracket them off and put them away. And I think what happens is it can be very overwhelming. And also I think that students carry a massive sense of responsibility, which is a good thing. But I think the wisdom of being a therapist is how much responsibility you carry. There are things that you need to be responsible for. And as I always say to the students, or when I was working with students, you're responsible to the client, not for the client, unless really you're working with children. But it is a big thing that comes up, and it can look like, I can't do this anymore, I'm frightened, I'm scared. And I think it's really important that students are encouraged to voice this, both in training, maybe it's in a case discussion or a personal development group, and certainly to voice it in supervision. Because if it's not worked through and discussed, what could happen is that in some cases, the student therapist can end up as unwell as the clients who they are seeing. They can get into real difficulties. So if you are a student out there and you're feeling this, first of all, I'd say you're not on your own, right, Ken?
Yeah. I think that was my starting point, Rory, is that well, we want to normalize this and say you're certainly not on your own. It means that you care. That's what it really means. In fact, this is such a popular topic. If you are a member of our student library, we call it the CSR, which is the Counselling Study Resources, there's a lecture in there. Just go in and search the term imposter syndrome. It is phenomenal, and it really delves deeply into the psychology behind this. It's that feeling that, I'm out of my depth. I can't do this. Any minute now, people are going to see through me. I'm just a student. I can't even remember some of the theory when I'm doing my assignments. All of these kind of things can play out in a loop in your mind as you're going through. Client starts bringing a presentation, and it's not a presentation that you've worked with before, and you think, I don't know how to work with that. And what do you do when a client starts bringing this kind of a presentation? So it can even show itself within a skill session with a client, and it can be, well, at the very least, it takes you away from the relationship with the client, because if you're in your own mind going, am I able to work with this? You're no longer with the client in whatever it is that they are bringing. And I wanted to give a quick fix. So we've normalized it, that everybody goes through this. And here's a secret. That lecture that I just mentioned that's in the student library, that exact same lecture is in our qualified practitioner CPD library that can only be accessed by qualified practitioners. Guess why? Because it doesn't go away. That imposter syndrome shows itself through again and again and again. So it's as relevant. So we've kind of normalized that, and I want to give you advice that I was given from my supervisor when I took this in, because I did, as you said, Rory, very soon in my placement practice, I was in at my supervisor going, I just don't know if I'm the right person for this. I don't know if I'm doing it right. I don't know if I'm good enough to be doing this. And my supervisor reminded me that it doesn't matter what the client's presentation is. It doesn't matter whether I've heard it before. I don't need to be an expert on every single form of presentation that a person can bring in. What I need to be is warm, empathic, non-judgmental, hold the professional space, and just gently welcome whatever it is that client is bringing. I'm not there to fix them. I'm not there to make them right, that at the end of the session they'll stand up and go, well, I went to see my counsellor and that's all sorted now. It's not my job, and it's not yours either. You're there to hold that space and to hold that client. And within that, you don't have a responsibility to sort it out, to have the right answers, to understand and remember the theory so you can weave it into your session. Those things matter less than you're actively listening, really hearing that person. And Rory, we can go into now how that is kind of that relationship and being heard is often seen as the most important part in therapy because it's so rare in everyday life.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the, if we want to use the term a curative factor, is being heard. I think a lot of people, as we've said on the podcast many times, Ken, listen to respond. They don't listen to actually hear. And when someone talks about their story and they're not judged or questioned, or someone comes up with 15 great ways that they might be able to cope, they're just listened to and heard. I think it's really, really powerful. And, I've witnessed, as I know you have, Ken, huge transformations in the room where people have talked about something and their own self-healing power has started to kick in. Once they're in a non-judgmental and empathic space, and they're regarded as humans. The idea, it's in person-centered therapy, but I think it's in most therapies. It's the root of most therapies, if I think we're being honest. Their own self-healing properties start to activate, and people can sometimes talk themselves into a better place by being able to talk about what's going on, what happened. And you're absolutely right. We're not experts. Our job is to listen, to be there for the client, and offer something that, something that's often said, the soil of a different kind, to offer that kind of space to discuss. And I think also, if you are a student and you're listening to this and you're feeling the weight of the work is starting to, be a bit burdensome, I think that is not only a trip to your supervisor and a discussion in your training, but also your own personal therapy. I think if it's bringing stuff up for you, then maybe, it's not maybe, I think it's a definite route to having your own personal therapy and exploring what's going on for you. And that is one of the reasons that courses ask that you undertake your own personal therapy. You have 10 or 20 hours because the material can be so powerful. It's a safety net, really. But yeah, I know those two lectures that lecture you discussed, that's both in the CSR and the CPD library, absolutely fantastic. The amount of people who've watched it, I felt a million times better about themselves. Is we sometimes get the odd email saying, "Oh, it was great that," but I want to say, if you're a student, you're listening to this and you feel this, and our conversation's resonating with you, you're not on your own. And you're probably doing a better job in service of your client than you believe that you are at this point.
Yeah, very much so. It means you care. That's where we started. So what we've done, we've taken the topic, we've kind of talked around it, we've normalized it. You believe me, you're not alone. We have spoken about small techniques of what you might do within a session, if that comes up within a session, recognizing why you are there. You're there to hold that client. And then importantly, Rory has kind of taken that to the next level of how might you work with that then. And it's about self-reflection, it's about journaling, it's about really thinking about it and exploring it. One of the things about imposter syndrome is it's like a previous topic that we spoke about today in shame, is it wants to hide itself away. I don't want anybody to find out that I'm out of my depth because my tutor might pull me or my supervisor might say, oh, well, then you're not fit for practice. So it keys into negative ways of thinking, and getting it out in the open by thinking about it reflectively, journaling about it, speaking with peers about it. Can you relate to this? Do you have any of these kind of feelings, so that it normalizes in that place? Bringing it up in professional discussion when there's an opportunity with your tutor, with your peers in your reflection group, and certainly taking it to your supervisor, who I promise will warmly welcome this topic.
Yes,
warmly welcome it. Are all the ways of dealing with this and working with it. And it does kind of show itself a number of times through life. It's completely normal. It's only because you really care about what you're doing. Any final thoughts on that, Rory?
Yeah, I think that, if you are a student, and you're sitting in that chair either, behind the desk or in the circle in the classroom, just remember that you didn't get your seat without somebody believing in you. Your tutor believes in you. I think it's something that's unseen really in counselling training. But when people apply for certainly practice level courses, and by practice level I mean a course that then will allow you to go on and work with clients, the tutors spend a lot of time considering readiness, emotional robustness. Is somebody in a place that they can confidently be given that fitness to practice letter, which really is it's a letter of comfort to the placement provider to say this person's ready to work with clients at a certain level. They're not given out lightly. Places on courses aren't given out lightly. They're done with a lot of consideration and, in some cases, a lot of soul searching. So take that confidence that perhaps is not said when you're on a practice-based course, and pop it in your pocket, carry it with you, because your tutors have confidence in you. They wouldn't have taken you onto the course if they weren't confident you would be able to engage with the work.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com. And we've focused very much on what that might look like as you go into practice and you're seeing clients, but it can apply at other stages in your counselling training journey as well. You may have this feeling around the work that you're doing, around the assignment works. You may have an assignment referred and this feeling comes up for you. Everything we've spoken about remains the same. Think about it, reflect on it, journal about it, speak about it to as many people as you can, as much as you can. I'm putting my hand up here and normalizing that I had assignments referred. Rory, did you have any assignments referred?
Everyone, I used to write them in batches.
There you go.
Just send another one in.
I think that there's something to that as well. It's about robustness. It really is about robustness. And when we opened this topic, Rory mentioned that sometimes we get some pretty heavy material that comes our way. And the training process to become a counsellor is it's not like any other kind of training courses that you go on and degrees that you go on. It's so different. And part of the training makes you robust. It asks you to refine yourself in those robust areas. It's all part of developing as a counsellor, as a psychotherapist, so that when you're out, that you are that person that is deserving of that seat, as Rory was saying. And when you've got those people behind you, your supervisor saying you can do this, your tutor saying you can do this, the agency you're working in saying you can do this, your letter that says you can do this, you've got all the validation you need. You're underpinned by the theory of your modality. You communicate using tried and tested skills that counsellors have used for decades and decades that are effective. You're okay. You are held. You're not alone. You're not alone. It might feel like it when you're in the room. And I wanted to leave on one final part of this. We were speaking about feeling not able to manage. What happens when the client speaks about this kind of topic? I don't know anything about that topic. Well, I've never been divorced. But I've worked with many clients who spoke about perhaps their journey through divorce and what that was like for them. And I didn't feel a need to go and get a great big thick book on divorce and learn everything about it and then go and experience it myself to be able to be there empathically and in service. And I think that's an example. And the opposite side of that coin is sometimes, if we have got experience of something happening to us, it can be a deficit in a client relationship as opposed to an asset. So an example of that, I worked in recovery services for many years, and I have my own recovery journey and my own recovery story. And one of the first things I learned is I've got to put that down and never bring it up. So I can't listen to a client speaking about their journey and go, well, you know what, I was in exactly the same place. What you need to do is this and this and this, because that's what worked for me. That's not helping that client. They're going to find their own way. Hopefully there's something in our discussion today that might ease that for you, or it may just call upon you to revisit it in a different way. And that is today's student services. And you have been listening to episode 369 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast.
Yes, we started with ethical and sustainable practice, and we talked about shame, the emotion that dare not speak its name, and how we engage with it. And of course, there's a super duper handout. Go to counsellingtutor.com, look at the podcast tab, episode 369, and it's a really comprehensive handout, one I think that every therapist might want in their library of information. On to practice matters, and I spoke with Nadine Pittam, talking about a lecture on limerence. Fascinating subject, and a term now that I think is really, really relevant in the psychotherapeutic canon. Have a listen to that lecture, have a listen to the interview, and of course she's done a fantastic lecture in the CPD library on it. And in student services, talking about feeling out of depth as a counsellor, as a student, not unusual. More people than you think feel out of depth. And Ken and myself talked about what you might like to think about to ease that burden a little bit. As always, thank you for your likes and your shares and your subscribes. And until we meet again, stay grounded, and you really are good enough.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode by visiting counsellingtutor.com.